So now let's move on to anxiety disorders. This is kind of fascinating. I think you guys will like this. Not that I'm for anxiety disorders, and not that I ever hope anybody of you get them, but they are kind of fascinating to study. And I think you'd be surprised at how many people probably have a form of anxiety disorder. Now, the description of that is extreme, chronic, meaning it lasts, it happens regularly, and it interferes with daily functioning, meaning you can't do a certain thing, you can't act a certain way. It bothers the way that you function every single day. This fear is exaggerated, or it's not in proportion to what is actually being experienced, meaning this fear is making things worse. Um, and what it is there might be some issue, but it's not in proportion to what is actually being experienced, what is actually happening. All anxiety disorders include some form of anxiety as the predominant symptom. Now, what is anxiety? It's just basically the physical symptoms are accelerated heart rate, meaning obviously your heartbeat is going faster than normal. You are breathing irregularly. You tend to sweat. You become dizzy. You could have muscle tensions and nausea, meaning you feel sick to your stomach. Now, these are not the only symptoms, but these are very, very common symptoms. I think there's a GIF that a lot of people use. It's that Sheldon guy from I don't even know, Big Bang Theory. I think it's the name of the show. I've never really seen it, but where he's like breathing into a paper bag. I'm sure you guys have used that before, and that would be part of this, the accelerated heart rate and the breathing, where you can't get everything under control, so you're trying your best to do so. It could include sweating, dizziness, and those things. Now, again, it could be one or all of these. The cognitive symptoms, meaning with your brain, it's just the fact that you tend to worry or you become very fearful about something. You also can become irritable, meaning people don't like being around you, and that tends to cause a problem as well. Now, behavioral symptoms would be you want to avoid people. Maybe you want to avoid the situation, escape aggression, where you are willing to fight, you are willing to combat people to escape whatever the problem may be. And you maybe could distract yourself from whatever the symptom could be, meaning you just run away from it, you distract it with something else. Maybe you distract your anxiety by smoking, by drinking. That could even be part of escape distraction as well. So, all of these things, when you sit down with a doctor and you explain what's going on in your body, they would ask you the physical symptoms, the cognitive symptoms, the behavioral symptoms, and all of these could be listed as problems that you might have yourself. An anxiety disorder is a real thing, and there's not necessarily a particular origin of where it could come because everyone's a little bit different. And so, therefore, when you have anxiety, people really struggle with it because it really can overtake your life. And when you look at anxiety, it can come from practically anything. It could come from the fact of a fear of failure in school, a fear of failure in your job, fear of failure from your family. And so stress can actually eventually lead to anxiety. And so there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. As far as a panic disorder, it is the unexpected onset of fear and anxiety. You must have a minimum of 4 symptoms with your panic disorder. And it reaches a peak level of exaggerated arousal within 10 minutes. So, what we're saying is this: when you have a panic disorder, all of a sudden it comes on to you. It happens, and it just takes your body over. And exaggerated arousal, meaning like you're at your height within 10 minutes. So that is like, I'm panicking, I can't do this, I can't do this. And the chief feature of the panic disorder are recurring, unexpected panic attacks, followed by at least 1 month of persistent concern about having another panic attack. And that's kind of one of the chief things that they're looking for. So when you sat down with a doctor, they would ask you, how often does this happen? And if it was to happen once every year, they would not say that you have a panic disorder, because it needs to follow by at least 1 month of persistent concern about having it. They would say, do you have it? And you'd say, well, this is what's going on. And then they would say, okay, well, if this is what's happening, how often does it happen? How often are you worried about it happening again? And if you're like, well, I'm not really worried about it happening again, then they would not diagnose you with a panic disorder. Individuals with this disorder often experience ongoing anxiety because they're worried about future panic attacks. This makes them more susceptible to current panic attacks. And so, if you do have this, you're nervous. You're nervous that this could happen at any point in time, and anything could trigger it. It could be something somebody says. It could be a situation. Maybe you drive. It could be something you driving. You'll hear some stories about people that have a panic attack, particularly people that have been in car accidents. When they get back behind the wheel for the very first time in a similar situation by which they got the car accident, you could have a panic disorder as a result of that. And so that would be part of this. So again, panic. And when you think about this, the physical symptoms of the anxiety disorder, when I said that it has to a minimum of 4 symptoms, these are the symptoms that we're talking about. Generalized anxiety disorder, also known as GAD. This is chronic, widespread, and persistent anxiety. These individuals are uneasy, they're anxious, and they experience excessive amounts of worry. Although they cannot identify the source of their anxiety, like a lot of times when people have anxiety, they're like, well, this is what triggers it. This is what makes me nervous. This is what makes me panicky. And these individuals can't really say what it is. A lot of times a person that has a anxiety disorder or a panic disorder can pinpoint what's going on. Hey, this is what's happening. This is when it's happening. This is when I know it gets triggered. Generalized, they can't really identify the source, and so what ends up happening is it kind of takes over their entire life. Free-floating anxiety is when the source of the anxiety cannot be identified. Like, again, it's free-floating, meaning sometimes it could be your kids. Other times it could be your job. Other times it could be your car not working. Other times it could be your grades. There's just all sorts of things that it happens, and the anxiety free floats throughout your life. Therefore, it makes it really tough to diagnose, but also that's why they all say, well, okay, well, you might just have a general anxiety disorder altogether. In order for a diagnosis for a generalized anxiety disorder, the individual needs to experience symptoms on most days, meaning out of the 7, 4 out of the 7 days for at least 6 months. Now, again, if you notice with these, if you go back up here, and they would say consistent extreme. This is just kind of the introduction here, but the panic disorder, this is dealing with at least 1 month. Generalized anxiety disorder dealing with 6 months. So we're getting a little bit more long as far as the time frame is concerned. Physical issues include difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, meaning your muscles become super, super tight. You can't really relax. Sleep disturbance, meaning you're obviously not getting enough sleep that you should be. And problems making decisions. And you're restless, meaning you just can't sit still. And so those are physical issues. Now, again, these are not all of them. These are general. These are the ones that they would really particularly look for. Phobic disorders. Phobias are intense. This is kind of interesting. Phobias are intense, irrational. This is the key here. I'd highlight that or circle that. Irrational, persistent fears of specific objects or situations that pose no actual danger, which leads to avoidance and anxiety that disrupt normal life. And so once in a while you hear people say, well, I have a phobia about that. When they're saying they have a phobia, they're literally admitting that it doesn't pose any actual danger, that it's an irrational fear. So specific phobias are irrational fears of objects and situations which do not pose any actual threat. This could be the fear of heights, the fear of closed spaces, the fear of snakes, the fear of spiders. Now, let's break this down a little bit. When we're talking about an irrational fear of heights, now, I had a friend in college that we were up near, kind of by Iron Mountain, Michigan is where our college was at. And we used to go up to this bridge. And there was a bridge that it was like they called it a train trestle bridge, and it was pretty cool. Basically, what it is the bridge is covering, going over water, but the bridge itself is just basically a railroad. So if there's a train coming, you can't really do anything to get off of the rails other than jump in the water that's probably 50 feet down. And when we're talking about this, if you're up there, you're not going to fall through the cracks on this bridge, okay? A big gust of wind isn't going to blow you over. You're, 100 plus pounds. But what happened is my friend would get up there and he couldn't stand on the bridge. He couldn't stand on the bridge because he was scared of heights. Well, the thing is it's irrational because if you are up that high, you're not really going to fall off of the bridge. Now, somebody could push you off. I understand that part. But it's irrational in the fact that that height isn't really going to do anything to you. You think about a fear of spider. A lot of you guys maybe don't like spiders or snakes. How many of you guys know of somebody that has been bitten by a spider and has died? And most of you guys, I'm guessing, every year I ask this question, at most one kid. But most of us have never heard of anybody even getting bitten by a spider, let alone bitten and die. Most of us do know somebody who's been bitten by a spider that turns into a spider person. His name is Peter Parker. That does not count here. Okay, so you guys that are thinking that. But spiders don't really actually pose any real threat to you. Think about how many spiders are in the world. And so same thing with snakes. Now I understand you guys like, well, what if you live in the desert and you could get bitten by a rattlesnake? Okay, well, most of us don't live in the desert and most of us have never even seen a rattlesnake. So again, what we're saying is those things that are irrational, they don't actually pose an actual threat to you, but they could. And so people just kind of linger on those things and it becomes a big deal to them. Social phobias or social anxiety disorders, a fear of fear of social situations or performing in public. This often prevents them from taking part in normal interactions due to the threat of embarrassment. It could be speaking, it could be eating, it could be performing. So this is like when a person gets up to give a speech and they just can't do it. They're just so nervous about it. Jerry Seinfeld used to have a joke that he would tell, and he said this, that psychologists and scientists have done a study that the top two human fears in the world are number one, speaking in public, and number two, dying. And he would always say that, so you're telling me that you would rather be the person in the casket than the person giving the eulogy at the person in the casket's funeral. And it is true. And some of you guys really struggle with speaking in front of people. But again, they would have to diagnose this, they would have to treat it. And it often prevents them from taking part in normal interactions due to the threat of embarrassment. A couple specific, another fear that I want to just cover here, agoraphobia. This is the fear of public spaces and open spaces due to the worry that one would not escape. Basically meaning like you're in New York City, Times Square, and you couldn't deal with that. You would really struggle with being in this area because you're like, I can't get out of here. Maybe it would be the fact that you couldn't, you're in a subway system and you couldn't get out. This would include airports, stores, concerts, sporting events, campuses. In extreme cases, people like this might not actually be able to leave your home. That would be part of this. Now, though individuals suffering from phobias realize that the fear is irrational, they remain unable to control it. They just simply can't stop worrying about what's happening. They can't do it. They get so nervous that it just really controls their life. And again, there are certain medicines that they could give a person, but really it comes down to them having to overcome this and conquer it. There's a TV show called, a movie called What About Bob? And it's with Bill Murray. It's an older movie. This guy had part of this agoraphobia. He had OCD, he had agoraphobia, he had all these phobias and social, anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. And the movie's kind of about that. If you guys ever seen the movie What About Bob? All right, we'll stop there and continue on tomorrow.